Welcome. Over the course of the past year, I've driven a lot of cars and I constantly get the same question. What's the cheapest, most fun to drive new vehicles you can get for under $30,000? So in short, I'm going to give you a little bit more detail on 3 cars that I think are the best option with 3 honorable mentions. So let's get started. Number 1, the best car I've driven for under $30,000 new is the Mazda MX-5 or ND Miata. And let me cover why this car is so special. The primary reason is its underpinnings. It is a dedicated platform. A lot of cars nowadays, they're kind of designed to be shared with like a sedan or a minivan or an SUV. They share all these different parts when they make a car. That's not what they did with this. It was specifically set up from the ground up to be a performance car, a sports car, lightweight, under 2,400 pounds, completely balanced. It has a 50-50 weight distribution front and rear. It has a 50-50 cross weight side to side. It is unbelievably balanced, and when you look at the underneath, it all makes sense. It's one of the few cars that has alignment capability, camber and caster in the front and camber in the rear. And when you look at it as a whole, there's so much aluminum, you almost have to go up to the $50,000 plus price range to see the elements that they put in on the underbody and the overall body structure of this car. And that's really why this thing stands out and it's so fun to drive. Now, there are some kind of cons to it. Despite it being built as a dedicated machine for people, it's also used in their racing series. They learn a lot from that. They've gone through 2 or 3 different iterations of their manual transmission because it hasn't held up to extreme beating on it, but they are improving it. The second thing is, this is not the most usable car to drive every day, and that's the biggest sacrifice of it. Yeah, you get the lightweight, you get the great balance, but it's really difficult to store things in here. The passenger space is compromised. You can't carry a lot of cargo in this car. Unlike some of the other cars that I'm going to say, you could at least carry some wheels and tires in it. You can carry passengers in it comfortable. So there is a trade-off to all that fun to drive part. But for the biggest pro is just drivability and fuel efficiency. You may look at the horsepower number and be like, oh, this is wimpy. But it really, because of the lightweight, it's fun to drive, and you're always going to get in the 30 mile per gallon range. So let's move on to number 2. The next car is the Toyota 86, GT86 or Subaru BRZ. Now, I bought this car back in 2013 as an early adopter. Over time, you have more perspective on things, and that's because I've been in a cajillion cars. And one thing I can tell you is, back then, I always felt like they left so much off the table. It was built to a price point. It could have been so much better. Now, 4 or 5 years later, I look and think, well, it's really one of the last simple back to basics driving experiences you can have aside from the Miata. And you really get to appreciate that when you drive new cars that have electronic parking brakes, 20 different drive modes, and electronic everything, infotainment, electronic gauge clusters, all the crap that you don't need to enjoy driving. And the 86 still has all of the good things that old school cars have. Now, yes, its biggest negative is it is built to a price point. When you look at the underneath, like even the press cars, there's a ton of surface rust. My car had a ton of rust after 2 years. They use stamped steel everywhere. There's no attempts at making this car super lightweight on the underbody. And some of it is shared with other cars like the Subaru Forester or the Impreza. It's not a completely dedicated platform. And I think what they've tried to do over the life cycle is keep it fresh, and now finally with the manual transmission version, they changed the final drive ratio, which makes it a lot quicker to drive, more like the Miata. There's a little bit improved horsepower, and that's a lot from friction reducing materials inside the motor. It's manufacturing improvements that they've made, not big changes. And I've driven every single iteration of this car, and I still think, despite its negatives, it's one of the most fun to drive cars you can have brand new for under $30,000. Now, much like the Miata, the 86 has great fuel economy, and that is largely because of the direct injection and the port injection on it. You get the best of both worlds there, and you have the storage capacity to fit wheels, tires, cargo, and a passenger, and you can store things in this car without a lot of sacrifice. So if you're not into rear-wheel drive, the third car in the list is the Honda Civic Si. And I think pretty much every Civic should have the powertrain in the Si because it's kind of what's missing in the base model Civics. The Si combines everything that you could possibly want on a daily driver with functionality, weird, quirky styling. It has a personality. The transmission is good. The engine is just good enough for daily driving. It's quick. It gives you immediate gratification. It has a limited slip differential, so it's not a one-wheel peel machine. And overall, the car is extremely well built. You look at the underneath, yes, there's a lot of stamped steel going on, but they've done a good job with sound isolation, aerodynamics. Overall, this is one of the best Civics in terms of build quality ever, and it really does translate into the driving experience. Now, is it as fun to drive as a 86 or a Miata? Hell no. You know, front wheel drive will never have that feeling that you get from a rear wheel drive platform. It's just not there. But if you're somebody that doesn't need that and just wants the best balance of fun, affordability, and just a real usable car year round, the Si is one of my favorite cars that I drove, you know, if you can get over some of the styling aspects. So that takes care of the the three best affordable new cars that I've driven. And now it's time to go on to honorable mention. Now people are going to be like, well, how could you leave this car out of the top 3 list? The Subaru WRX. It is extremely fun to drive, and it might be the most practical car in terms of a sporty car you can have with having all-wheel drive. You throw some real tires on here, I mean, you could dominate every condition, and that's a huge pro. It is a little bit more on the expensive side. My biggest problem with the WRX is the factory tuning just sucks. There's just something not right about the driving experience. It just doesn't have good linear performance, consistent performance all the time, and it just feels dated just from a solidity driving standpoint. Yes, it's a little bit more back to basics. It's a more simple approach. It just doesn't feel as satisfying to drive in stock form, and that's why everybody modifies it, of course. So that's honorable mention 1. The second car is the Elantra Sport, and I really like this car. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Now, the reason it loses to the Si is you don't have a limited slip differential, so it becomes a one-wheel peel machine. But it does best the Si in a lot of ways in terms of refinement, interior kind of usability, but it just lacks some type of personality. It has the more mature feeling to it, the more solid feel to it, and if that's what you're looking for, you're going to take it over the Si, but I think it's a really good attempt, and I hope that they continue to improve that car. Last but not least, and this is a very weird one, is the Fiat 500 Abarth. And you know, when I did that review, people, of course, didn't finish the review. They watched the first 5 minutes and trashed it because I didn't like it. Well, if you watched it, you realize I really love driving that car on the street. It's fun, it's weird, it's entertaining, and it sounds amazing. Like all these components that make a really entertaining driving daily, car that you put on the street every day. It's not good in terms of performance in stock form, in terms of autocross or track. It just feels messy. The manual trans isn't the greatest. It's just a quirky car, but it is so enjoyable just to kind of beat on and drive every day. And I think the owners they love this thing, and I can see why. One of the better parts about it is you can go out and go to a dealership and get a great deal on these cars. They're practically giving them away. As long as you have a warranty and you know what you're getting into, that would be a great other front-wheel drive option. So there it is. I look forward to talking to you guys in 2018 about more cars, and I'm going to have a ton of videos coming up. So take care.